And these 411 cases are no
Mm-mm.
exception. I've heard disappearances blamed on Bigfoot, alien abductions, interdimensional portals, government
Yeah.
conspiracies, you name it. Hello, everyone. Suzanne and John back again with another episode of God and the Paranormal, a podcast exploring high strangeness from a biblical worldview. Thanks for joining us. Well, once again, we're looking at a topic that doesn't necessarily have to involve anything paranormal, but a lot of it kind of ends up that way, doesn't it? Kind of like fringe of the
Mhm.
fringe topic today.
Yeah, it seems that way. We're going to examine some of the strange disappearances of people that are being reported. And right from the start, I have to admit, this already sounds like sensationalist conspiracy theory stuff, doesn't it?
Well, because people have been going missing since there have been people,
Hmm.
and for all kinds of reasons. But we're not talking about the typical missing persons cases, if I can even use that term. I don't want to minimize those in any way, though.
Yeah, right. Any sudden disappearance is obviously devastating to families. They're often implicated at some stage of this, and very often they don't get any closure on the tragedy.
It's really sad. But
Hmm.
we seem to be seeing, or maybe just becoming more aware of a class of incidents where a person simply seems to vanish in unlikely
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah. David Paulides has been instrumental in bringing these cases to the public's attention, I think. The listeners have probably heard of his books and videos, the Missing 411 series.
Yeah.
Paulides is a former police detective with experience in conducting criminal investigations. And I'll go ahead and say this too. He also has written material that explores the possibility of Bigfoot.
But so have you.
Well, yes, I have. But obviously, he makes a living with his books. And, just to be forthright, he does speaking engagements. So this is his thing.
But that doesn't necessarily disqualify his opinions.
No, no. And I think the fact that he has a significant following at least says something about his credentials. There
Mm.
are some who dismiss his research, obviously, which isn't perfect, but it is for the most part based on what I think is conventional investigative procedures.
And when you look at his work, it seems that he does usually just present the evidence. He doesn't drill his own beliefs into his audience, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, you'll hear him discussing possibilities, but he says many times he doesn't have answers to what he's looking at yet. And he doesn't want to push one conclusion over another until he thinks there's more evidence. And let me emphasize this. We're not trying to prove or disprove any of Pilates' work. Just as with any popular cultural phenomenon, I'm interested in how this affects our or helps to change our cultural worldview in some way.
Right. So, for the first part of this episode, let's look at some of his cases. Then we'll discuss how this interacts with the biblical worldview. So, Paulides says that he was first brought into this subject when an off duty park ranger approached him with peculiarities surrounding some disappearances from a national park.
Yeah, hundreds, maybe thousands of unusual
Wow.
disappearances at national parks. But to be clear, national parks are where Pilates focuses his research. So, long story short, it was allegedly the lack of cooperation or the lack of records from the park that led him to these cases he works on.
Especially Yosemite, according to
Uh-huh.
Paulides.
Yeah, one of the larger clusters of cases, he notes. And that seems to be one of the first interesting characteristics. Most incidents are clustered together, indicating that there's some commonality or connection somewhere.
And that's the first thing that distinguishes these perplexing cases from others.
Mhm.
There seems to be a set of commonalities that keep popping up.
Yeah, and to emphasize again, there are all kinds of missing persons cases. A few stats, over 600,000 per year reports of missing people
Wow.
in the US. The majority of these are solved, though, and sometimes within hours, sometimes within years. But the person is found, a body found, blood or other evidence is discovered, and it's a closed case. In fact, there are about 5,000 unidentified bodies discovered each year.
Yikes. And a multitude of possibilities. It's not illegal to go off grid and not tell anyone.
No.
People do that. Kids run away from home, adults run away. Some lose contact because of mental problems. People are kidnapped. Sadly, we know human trafficking is real. Accidental death, homicide, and suicide are all
Yeah.
possible explanations.
Yeah, and Pilates considers all of this in his research. If the data seem to indicate a missing person has a likely cause for being missing, he excludes those. And there may be a fine line sometimes between
Hmm.
these. However, he applies criteria that I think really do separate the cases he investigates from other cases. And I think that the way he's organized all the data, that's where some incidents lead to mysterious commonalities that aren't really noticed when looking at isolated cases.
Yes, Paulides has generated a list of red flags that might indicate a kind of high strangeness, to use that term again.
And before Pilates started organizing all the data, it was difficult to see the similarities without this big picture view that he has, especially of some of the national park disappearances. Much like criminal cases, profiles seem to emerge when you look at big data sets.
Yeah, one interesting thing he learned is that the park services don't keep a very good record on missing person
No.
cases.
Which isn't surprising or condemning. Most missing cases aren't classified as crimes, so there's no mandate to keep extensive record on these.
And he notes it's possible not to have a lot of communication over the cases among local search and rescue, police, FBI, and such.
Yeah, until the present. And I credit Pilates with much of that.
Oh, okay. So his special case criteria, Paulides has identified what he calls profile points. If a case hits enough of these, it goes into his investigation pool. Here are some of the profile commonalities. The first, bad weather. Almost immediately after the person vanishes, severe weather rolls in. Snow, torrential rain, wiping out footprints and other evidence. Is this the factor that simply turns a more convention case into something more mysterious?
I wonder that too. And I think that's why searchers sometimes come to the conclusion that there's nothing odd about a particular case. You initiate a rescue procedure, then eventually you give up because you assume any trackable signs have been compromised by the weather. And that's why I think Pilates profile points are important. It's the combination of multiple similarities that makes some cases unusual. Scientists and even our court system don't usually base a decision on a single element, but on the preponderance of evidence, they would say.
Okay, another point. Canines can't pick up missing persons trail. Search dogs either refuse to track, sit down, or the scent trail just ends abruptly. Could this be due to the weather conditions?
You know, I thought that too. Do search dogs usually pick up a scent? When I looked this up and heard what the experts had to say, they say search dogs are better than most people think. And that's why not finding some kind of trail might be considered unusual sometimes. Track dogs should be able to follow fresh scents in all kinds of situations. And this happens in cases without bad weather as well.
Here's an unusual one. The victim's clothing is missing or eventually found neatly folded, sometimes far away. Ugh.
Yeah, especially shoes and footwear. It's very common in these strange cases that either footwear is found discarded or the body is eventually found barefooted or something like that.
Even in rugged, rocky terrain
Yeah,
and cold weather, why would a lost person take off their
yeah,
shoes?
exactly. That seems to suggest the victim was in some kind of duress or they weren't thinking straight for some reason.
And that touches on another profile point. The victim group as a whole tends to be skewed toward either persons with physical or mental limitations, and those who are very athletic and fit and have higher than average IQs. Interesting.
Yeah, and I don't understand that either, but average people like me seem to be at low risk for going missing.
That's
And in
encouraging.
yeah, and in that group of disproportionately high number of medical doctors and people with degrees in physics of all things.
That's crazy.
Hmm.
Good factors for some interesting conspiracy theories, though.
Or a really good episode of X-Files.
Yeah. Okay. Another demographic. Geography. Many go missing near granite boulder fields or bodies of water.
And you know, the granite boulders are interesting, I think. Granite is in lots of places, but it's just
Hmm.
weird that people tend to be, the ones that he studies tend to be around large granite boulders and water too. That's pretty ubiquitous in most
Yeah.
places, but you know, I don't know.
Yeah, and water provides another cause of mysterious disappearance, maybe drownings.
I think that's possible, but more to consider. Of the 1,127 cases Paulides has investigated so far, 44% are still missing. 31% were actually found as a dead body or trace of a body, and 24% were found alive. Now,
Hmm.
interestingly, the 31% eventually found dead, that's about 350 of the cases he's looked at. The cause of death couldn't be determined.
That's unusual.
Yeah, forensic science is pretty good today about things like that. So you would
Yeah.
expect investigators to at least find a COD. And the point is, back to the water, drowning isn't a common COD in the cases that they found.
I've heard that many of these with no COD, they often blame the death on hypothermia, which kind of goes along with the missing clothing.
Yeah, and that's a possibility, I think. Sometimes hypothermia does cause mental confusion,
Yeah.
but that could be more of a scapegoat for investigators, I think. When there's no obvious cause of death, hypothermia is usually the last resort that they come to. Although even hypothermia has symptoms and it leaves evidence of some sort.
Yeah, I would think that a forensic team would be able to see that.
You would think so. But here's another strange commonality. When a victim is found, alive or dead, that's 55% of the cases. So the person or body was found in places that had been searched already very thoroughly, sometimes multiple times by multiple people, and sometimes for days with massive searches and lots of rescue efforts everywhere.
Which this seems to imply that they were somewhere else for a while,
Yeah.
then brought back to that
Yeah, it
place.
does. And also, with the victim found alive, most of the time, they don't have any memories of anything that happened while they were missing. So, some sort of amnesia happening to them.
Now that is strange.
Yeah. And that might be explainable in isolated cases, but when it's a common factor, it just suggests a more complicated series of events, I think.
Okay, let's get into some of the representative cases. Here's one Paulides presents in his video, 2-year-old Dior Kuntz, 2014.
Yeah, here's a summary. And by the way, his video is free on YouTube, so it's very interesting to listen to it. So, Salmon Chalice National Forest near Idaho Falls, 2-year-old Dior, his parents and his great-grandfather and one of his friends were camping in a very secluded spot, no other people around. Little Dior and his parents start walking to the creek, which was only about 50 meters from their campsite, mostly an open area, very rocky again. But Dior wants to go back to the grandfather who was sitting by the camper. And so he heads back. Mother is watching him to see he makes it. She turns her head for a moment and all of a sudden looks again, and he's completely gone.
Oh,
So
oh,
they go back. Grandfather hasn't seen the toddler. Mother calls 911. Within the hour, search and rescue begins combing the area.
that's so terrifying. A child there 1 second and then vanished.
Yeah. And I feel for the parents who lose a child that way. That's just catastrophic, I think. I know this in a very small way because when we took a vacation one summer to a large city nearby, and for the first time, we stayed in a very tall, probably 15 story hotel.
Yeah.
And yeah, my son was a toddler, probably 3 years old at that time, and he just loved elevators. And so we're
Oh,
walking toward the elevator, and yeah, you know the story. He runs ahead, runs right in, and then the door closes, and he's gone. And so
that's,
I'm panicked at that point.
yeah.
You know, it's not as bad as being in a wilderness somewhere, but I'm thinking, is he with some stranger now, or what's going to
Yeah.
happen? Anyway, long story short. a few minutes later, a guy's bringing him downstairs to the desk. And fortunately, he met a nice guy who brought him and knew what to do, and everything worked out okay. But I can
Oh,
certainly see the devastation people would feel with something like this.
yeah. That brings up questions in my mind, though, about the Dior thing. Sometimes
Mhm.
kids just take off and could be out of sight for just a few seconds. How do we know his disappearance didn't have a sad but simple cause?
Yeah, and in investigative sense, we really don't. I can imagine scenarios as did those involved and Paulides. What if Dior just started running like toddlers do sometime? And what if the parents just underestimate the time he was there?
Yeah, but I mean, if he was going for his grandfather, that's where he would have run to.
Yeah, it
But
seems like it.
could there have been someone else who abducted him? Sad to say, but that does happen.
Yeah, and in these cases though, that comes up very often, and there doesn't seem to be someone around. And yeah, granted, I could see a very elaborate kidnapping strategy or something, but it just doesn't have the feel of that most of the time. And there's no evidence of someone being around. And in today's world, we see this all the time. I hate to even talk about things like this, but humans are valuable assets to some criminals. We know human trafficking exists for all kinds of motives, even with adult disappearances.
Yeah.
And as hard as it sounds, human organs are bought and sold on the black market today.
Yeah. Another equally repulsive idea. What if the parents are lying? What if
Yeah.
they did something to Dior either accidentally or on purpose?
Yeah. And that's, a lot of times in investigations, that's the first thing they look at. And that
Mm,
was one of the first possibilities they thought of here. The searchers couldn't find anything. So the media made up all kinds of accusations about the parents being responsible,
that's so
or
hard.
why didn't the mother sound more upset on the 911 call? The parents were having financial problems, as it turned out.
Could he have fallen into the creek?
I've watched that video of this site many times, and it's a shallow creek with lots of debris and limbs in it. And searchers say they waded up and down for miles and didn't see anything. So that kind of
And
rules
they
that out.
they ruled out animal attacks as well, like bears, cougars.
Well, you can't really rule something like that out, except that with animal attacks, there are usually signs. And, animals are messy and usually leave a lot of evidence at the scene. But all of these possibilities are valid for this case. It's when you get the big picture of the group of similar events that some evidence just becomes more powerful, I think. So here's a related case.
Okay. Dennis Martin. This goes back several decades, June 14th, 1969. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park.
Yeah, Dennis was 6 years old.
Right. It's Father's Day weekend. Dennis is there with his dad, brother, and grandpa. They are in a grassy clearing called Spence Field. Dennis's father sees him playing a prank. He hides behind a bush to apparently jump out and scare the adults.
Yeah, classic kid stuff, isn't it?
His dad sees him go behind the bush. After a minute, he doesn't jump out. Dad goes to check, gone, vanished in a relatively clear area. Now, this triggered the largest search in the park's history. We're talking Green Berets, National Guard, 1,400 people. But here's the kicker. A few miles away, a family, the Keys, hear a sickening scream, they call it. Then they see what they call a rough-looking man running through the woods with something red slung over his shoulder. Dennis was wearing a red shirt when he disappeared.
Yeah, very strange. The FBI was called in, but they eventually concluded the Key family sighting probably wasn't related because the location they said was too far for a man to have run all
Hmm.
that time. But this case file remains classified for several reasons. They never found a button, a shoe, nothing, just completely gone.
It's classified?
Yeah, you can't get information on it.
Hmm.
That's weird in itself.
Yeah, that is so weird. All right, here's another one. This is kind of getting disheartening, but
Hmm.
the Stacy Arras case, Yosemite Park, 1981. These are older cases.
Yeah, they go way back.
Stacy was 14. She's on a horse trip with a group, including her dad. They stop at a camp, and she wants to go to take photos of a lake. An old man from the group goes with her, but gets tired and sits down. He watches her walk a bit further, and she disappears around a bend.
Yeah, and this also involved a massive search with over 1,000 people.
Yes, but here's the haunting part. They found one thing, her camera lens cap, just sitting there. No camera, no Stacy.
Hmm.
Paulides actually tried to get the full case file on this one from the National Park Service, didn't he?
Yeah, he filed a Freedom of Information Act request and they denied it for some reason. They told him released results would shock the public too much.
That's disconcerting.
Yeah, shock the public. What does that even mean? For a missing hiker case from 1981, that's just suspicious, I think.
Are a lot of these cases classified?
Several, especially around Yosemite. According to Paulides, Yosemite either just doesn't keep very good records or they just deny that they have the records.
Another disappearance. Jared Adadero. Let's talk about the impossible distance factor here. October 1999, Colorado. Jared was 3 years old. He's at a resort, runs ahead of the group, and vanishes. Search and rescue went everywhere. Dogs never picked up a scent. 4 years later, hikers are far up a steep mountainside, about 550 feet above where Jared vanished. A vertical climb.
Yeah, and I've got to say, there's no way a 3-year-old can climb 550 feet. And it was a very steep climb.
So they find his clothes, his
Hmm.
fleece jacket, pants, and shoes. But here's the detail that has people guessing. The pants were turned inside out, and his sneakers were pristine. No scuff marks. The soles looked new. That is
Yeah,
terrifying.
no evidence of climbing a steep, rocky cliff or of an animal attack. Why would his pants be turned inside out?
And an investigator said it looked like he had just been lifted out of the area.
Yeah, strange.
Okay, speaking of kids moving impossibly fast, Keith Parkins of Ryder, Oregon, 1952. Keith is 2 years old. He vanishes from his grandfather's ranch. Now remember, he's two, barely walking. He is missing for 19 hours. They find him alive, but where they found him is the problem. He was 12 miles away through snowy, rough terrain, over two fences, and across a frozen river. Wow.
Hmm.
Survival expert Les Stroud from Survivor Man actually tried to recreate this hike. He was exhausted. He said there's absolutely zero chance a 2-year-old does that.
Yeah, and he was lying on a frozen pond on the ice. His jacket and hat had been taken off and they were stacked neatly beside him for some reason. So I'm thinking here, if another person was involved in this and he was actually kidnapped, you still have the problem of someone transporting him over this rocky, rough terrain for 12
Yeah.
miles during the time that he was missing. So are we talking a helicopter or did they have four-wheel drives going around dirt roads or something to do this? This actually implies, though, someone who is purposely or consciously doing something, or at least an intelligence of some sort that's moving these people from one place to the other.
Because of the neatly stacked clothes, right? That's the point you're making.
Yeah, and the distance. So,
The
the distance is always going to be a problem over rough terrain. And that's why I'm thinking if we go with the idea that someone was staging this or trying to kidnap or something, that just doesn't seem like something obvious that someone would do. It's just not there's no plan there, it looks like.
But they're not finding tracks of anyone else.
And that's right. No tracks, no evidence, just tiny little footprints all over the place.
So let's move on to adults because people will say, oh, kids wander off. But experienced hunters, that's different. Aaron Hedges in 2014, Crazy Mountains, Montana. Hedges was 38, an experienced outdoorsman who gets separated from his friends. He radios that he got lost but was heading back to a cache the group had made.
But he apparently never makes it there. And the timeline is baffling. Days later, they find his boots and water bottle near a makeshift fire pit that he had obviously built.
He took his boots off in the snow.
Yeah, again, so blame it on hypothermia. But wait, a year later, they find his backpack and bow, his hunting bow, 6 miles away from where they found the boots.
What?
And then after another year, they find his remains eventually 4 miles from that place.
So he walked 10 miles barefoot in the snow, an
Uh,
experienced outdoorsman.
Yeah, supposedly in very rough terrain. It just defies physiology, I think. You don't walk 10 miles in the Rockies without boots on.
This is just really disconcerting because if there is nefarious stuff involved, like what is happening?
Yeah, it doesn't
Anyway,
seem to fit that scenario, I don't think.
okay. Another adult, Tom Messick, 2015, near Lake George, New York. Messick was 82 years old, but very fit. He's hunting with family. They use a drive technique where some sit, others walk forward to push the deer out.
And this time, Tom was a sitter. He was sitting there waiting on the deer to come about 40 yards from a main road. The other hunters are nearby and they can hear nothing, no gunshot, no yells, nothing. And when they go to collect him, he's just gone, completely vanished. No tracks, no blood, no drag marks. And here's the weird part. The FBI showed up again almost immediately, and they brought in high-tech surveillance for looking for him.
That's pretty unusual in itself. The
Hmm.
FBI usually doesn't get involved unless they know a crime has been committed.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got little kids traveling miles, pants inside out, sudden disappearances, impossible distances. What are the theories?
Well, if you follow Paulides, he alludes to possible explanations, but again, he never explicitly claims one of these.
And says he does that on purpose
Yeah,
until he knows for sure he doesn't want to bias anyone's opinion, which I think is a good strategy.
yeah. And as we discussed earlier, taken individually, these cases could all have relatively ordinary explanations.
Yeah,
Could all the cases be complicated kidnappings? It's possible. That would explain the long distances involved anyway, especially with the children. But that doesn't get us any closer to the why.
exactly. Well, there are sick people out there who may not need a logical reason to do evil or strange things.
Yeah, that's true. And if not a complete explanation, maybe that explains some portion of these cases. Plus, that doesn't fit some of the data. Bodies found with no cause of death, victims not remembering anything, dogs not being able to track.
Yeah, yeah. And with so many cases, it seems that someone would see the kidnapper, or there would be more evidence of a struggle or something. But as we usually end up doing, let's address the elephant in the room again.
Yeah, that elephant just keeps popping up, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. So here we go. Does any of this involve the paranormal?
I think that's a valid question since this podcast actually is about paranormal things.
And in case we have new listeners who are starting with this episode, let's clarify. When we say paranormal, we're usually just referring to the supernatural.
Yeah, and not just any supernatural. We believe in a biblical view of the supernatural, a real place where God and some of his created beings live. We base this on passages such as Ephesians 6 that tell us not every supernatural entity is a good entity.
We have lots of episodes that lay this all out if anyone wants a crash course.
Yeah. So, as with most strange occurrences, it's easy to imagine supernatural causes. That just seems to be where your brain goes with things
Yes.
like this. When you seemingly exhaust natural explanations, we humans just have a tendency to kind of go toward the paranormal, supernatural, it seems.
And these 411 cases are no exception.
Mm-mm.
I've heard deer disappearances blamed on Bigfoot, alien abductions, interdimensional portals, government
Yeah.
conspiracies, you name it.
And to state our stance once again, we believe most alleged paranormal phenomena are simply misidentifications, hoaxes, or confusion, human imagination, or something like that. However, if in that small group of unexplained events we're left with only supernatural explanations, these will necessarily be the supernatural described in Scripture. It's not going to be some random Hollywood pop culture view of it. God's Word clearly presents the reality of evil entities who scheme and actively work to deceive humans and to lead us away from the truth.
Then the big question, could some of these hard to explain 411 cases be the result of something demonic?
Well, I'm wrongly accused sometimes of seeing a demon behind every bush. In past episodes, we've discussed how fallen beings could deceive us with maybe UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, and most of the stuff we talk about. But I really don't see a biblical precedent for demons kidnapping people in the way we see in these cases. And I
Right.
admit I could be wrong. Satan will do whatever God allows and could certainly make a good deception out of some of these cases.
But you don't think God will allow that?
I don't think so. And like I said, I just don't see this in scripture. We have Satan as an angel of light causing all kinds of deceptions, possibly with real physical media. Demons can possess individuals. They can likely cause experiences, but I don't think it would cause a sudden unexplained disappearance. And I could be wrong.
But could this be something like the alleged alien abductions? We believe those incidents could have demonic sources, and those experiencers sometimes are missing for periods of time.
Yeah, I still think there's a qualitative difference about these. Abduction claims may be more of a mental deception than a physical disappearance, I think.
So you don't think demons are involved with these stranger cases?
Well, I need to qualify that, I think. And this is why I wanted to do this episode. I think Satan can certainly use these cases and the phenomena in general to kind of advance his deceptions. And that's clear with the mystique of this phenomena.
Yeah.
Worldviews are being changed in a negative direction by how people are interpreting these disappearances.
A lot of fear, too, is being
Hmm.
caused. And
Yeah.
Satan can easily use false beliefs to accomplish his evil ends.
Yeah, very much so. Just the general idea that these cases are high strangeness can give the illusion that our world is just completely out of control, weird.
Right.
Maybe we should rethink our ideas about God. Can there be a loving, purposeful God who allows things like this to happen?
And anytime paranormal sources are even considered, that brings in false ideas about cryptids and alien abductions and all kinds of craziness.
Yeah, that's right. Bottom line, worldviews are being altered, and that suits Satan very well, I think, whether these are something he just runs across or he's actually doing something in this scenario. People are being fooled into accepting an unbiblical view of reality. Even some believers are, I think. So if there's anywhere clear thinking is needed in the church, this is it, I think.
Well, that's certainly our objective with this podcast, to examine high strangeness from a biblical worldview. We'll definitely keep following this phenomenon closely, as well as other ideas that oppose the biblical worldview. Thank you for joining us in this episode. If you would like to comment or ask questions, please send us an email at godintheparanormal@gmail.com. You can also get more information at our website, thinkingaboutthebible.com. If you found this podcast useful or interesting, we really depend on you subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing it with others. You can find us on most major podcast platforms. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye for now.